Hi, everybody. You're listening to Comics and History, episode number 114, part 2, a tribute to Chris Ivy's From Kid to Flash podcast, with a look at Waid and LaRock's The Return of Barry Allen continued. And welcome to the show. I am your host, Brian J. Rygate, and class is back in session as we continue our look at the 1993 Flash storyline, The Return of Barry Allen, in tribute to my friend Chris Ivy and his recently wrapped up podcast, From Kid to Flash. I ended off part 1 midway through my overview of Flash number 74, which was the opening segment of the Return of Barry Allen storyline. So, spoilers ahoy, let's move forward. Following the battle at the carnival, which ended in a complete success for Barry, Wally, and the Piper, we see Barry at a cemetery. He is at the grave of his wife, Iris West Allen. He pours out his heart to Iris, and in expressing his grief and his fear over living a life without her, he says he wishes that he had their nephew's trust, to which Wally, who has been hiding the whole time, tells Barry that he has Wally's trust now, as this is what Wally was waiting for. He needed to hear Barry talk about the woman who was so important to both men. It's important to keep in mind that in the post-crisis era, it was really established that Iris and Barry were almost like second parents to Wally. He certainly did not have a good relationship with his father, and so he found himself spending a lot of time with his aunt Iris. And then through Iris, he would meet Barry and go on to become Kid Flash. And Barry would, of course, become his mentor. Even in the pre-crisis era, Wally was still spending a good amount of time with Iris and with Barry. And in both the pre- and post-crisis eras, while Wally may have looked upon Iris as a second mother, I don't know that he ever viewed Barry as a second father, really. He certainly would address him as Uncle Barry, but I think that Barry was so important to Wally that, given Wally's relationship with his dad in the post-crisis era, he didn't want to apply the term second father to Barry. Of course, Iris was so influential in Wally's early life. If it wasn't for her, he would never have experienced the events which led to him becoming Kid Flash in the first place. Now, Barry does make an interesting comment that he feels that Iris is not so far away from him and that they will be together again one day. And this is interesting foreshadowing, you could say, for something that comes later in the storyline and even later in Waid's run on The Flash. Alright, moving into Flash number 75. Serves as part 2 of The Return of Barry Allen. I do want to say that all of the covers for the story arc were provided by Ty Templeton, who also gets a word of thanks from Mark Waid and the Afterword for contributing the idea of a particular book, which comes to be mentioned later on in the story. But right now, Barry is now back full-time as the Flash. He is joining Wally and Jay on their adventures fighting criminals and saving civilians from harm. When a group of kids come to the Flash for autographs, Wally sees that the kids have come to see Barry and not Wally. And while Wally is not necessarily jealous, he does share his concern with Linda that he is not certain about his identity now that the man whose legacy he sought to carry is back, and there are now 3 men who call themselves Flash. Wally cuts his musing short as Jay calls to tell him that the police sent him word of possible crime activity at an abandoned warehouse. Wally heads out into action, and along the way he sees Barry in an alleyway, searching for something which he feels can help fully restore all of his memories. Barry joins Wally and Jay at the warehouse, where they encounter a heavily tech-armed group calling themselves the Combine. Wally observes how much more powerful Barry is than Wally. We see that Barry is a lot faster and is clearly more experienced than his nephew. Wally appears to be killed in the battle, and Barry goes berserk on the Combine member who buried Wally in the rubble. The words used by this member of the Combine are, "I'm the one who killed the Flash." Of course, Wally isn't dead, but his costume is certainly the worse for wear. The cowl is torn and his hair is exposed. It's actually a nice nod to his Kid Flash look. Also, kind of neat for readers of the current DC reality. This is much like Wally's current look with his new Flash costume, which leaves the top of his head exposed so that his red hair shows through. But as Wally approaches his uncle, he is mortified to hear that Barry is not so concerned about his nephew's death. Barry is screaming that he is the Flash. So we move on to Flash number 76, the third part of the story. And Wally recalls how happy he was, on the day that Barry gave him his first Kid Flash costume. At the time, of course, it was a kid-sized version of the Flash costume. And Chris covered that really great issue of the Flash, which explained how Wally came to wear that yellow and red costume that most fans think of when they think of Wally West before he became the Flash. Wally also recalls how great it was being his uncle's partner. We see Wally again recalling the events of Crisis and his taking of the mantle of the Flash in order to keep Barry's legacy alive. For the sake of readers who are joining the story midway through, Wally also recalls how Barry returned and explained how he came back. Wally looks back on his first adventures with his resurrected uncle before telling the reader that he is not sure whether he, i.e. Wally, is paranoid for feeling redundant in light of Barry's return, or whether he is right to feel that Barry is the one showing signs of erratic, unstable behavior. And certainly, leading up to the storyline, one thing that was very clear about Wally's state of mind throughout his run on the title, no pun intended, is that he certainly had a high degree of self-doubt as to whether he could successfully live up to his uncle's name. Now, as it turns out, Jay is also concerned about Barry's behavior, and to that end, he seeks out 2 other speedsters, Johnny Quick and Max Mercury. Of course, older readers will be well familiar with Johnny Quick. Johnny Quick, another Golden Age character who appeared in DC Comics throughout the pre-Crisis era. Johnny looks very good for his age, and he now has a career in producing and starring in infomercials, while Max has been trying to live a normal life out of a costume. That actually provides an interesting parallel with the pre-crisis Wally's wish to leave superheroing by the time he graduated from college. Now, we'll learn over the second half of the storyline that Max is much older than Jay and Johnny and has had multiple superhero identities over time. Mark Waid and Geoff Johns would both periodically give us stories about Max's past. And we see just how much older he was than Jay and Johnny. And when I think of Max Mercury, I think about his time as yet another supporting cast member, not just in a Flash title, but also in the Impulse title, as he became Bart Allen's mentor in the post-Zero Hour era. So this is really neat for myself and other readers, getting to see Max Mercury for the first time in this story. Now, Wally and Barry have teamed up to find the Combine, and they end up encountering a villain who traps them in a force field that is gradually shrinking and will eventually kill them. Barry is able to vibrate through the force field, but he leaves Wally stuck halfway. It looks like Barry's going to help Wally initially, as Wally says, well, I can't vibrate through solid objects, but if you can lend me some of that vibrational frequency, I can pick up on that, and it'll take me a bit more time, but I can get through. Well, after getting fully freed, Barry turns back, and he refuses to help Wally get out of the force field. In fact, he goes on to give Wally a pretty serious emotional beatdown as he accuses Wally of stealing his name and making the people forget Barry. Barry goes on to say that he is angry at all of Central City for forgetting him, and that he is now making it his mission to ensure that the people remember Flash as the man who destroyed the city. He then runs off to leave Wally to die. Thankfully, Wally is able to break free, and he heads home. And as he breaks free, he questions who he is being the Flash for now that he has seen the sort of person that his uncle is or has become. On top of that, Wally is completely crushed as on the news, Barry tells reporters that Wally West failed to live up to the job of being the Flash and has died in an unfortunate accident. Now, as I mentioned in part one, I was reading The Return of Barry Allen through the Flash by Mark Waid book 2. And so this volume includes an issue of Green Lantern, volume 3, specifically issue number 40. It's written by Gerard Jones, but I think it's safe to say that he was in close contact with Waid when writing this story. It's actually quite important to the return of Barry Allen's story arc, as we see Hal and Barry fighting each other at the Flash Museum. Hal still believes this man is Barry and that he is out of his mind, but he has to be stopped in any event. This issue, as well as the earlier Flash GL crossover I talked about in part one, just acts as a really nice piece of history for Green Lantern and Hal in general. Of course, this was a year before Hal would have his downfall and become Parallax, and this is years before Geoff Johns retconned the concept of Parallax. And so when we see Hal with those pretty significant streaks of white in his hair, it actually reflects Hal's older, wiser, almost elder statesman-like characterization during this time. And this issue also serves to show us how important their friendship is to Hal, as he's having a tough time in his personal life Also in his career as Green Lantern, because he fears that his longtime love, Carol Ferris,